this is Catherine from Accelerated Reader, reading books for you. Today, I will be reading Book 2 from the Henry and Kathleen series of children's books, High Tea Through the Tunnels of London, an enchanting story on magic and etiquette, by Taryn Jahme. Before I begin reading, I would like to give a big thanks to the author for sending me this book to read on my channel. In the description below, I've included links where you may find and purchase this book. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Right at the bottom of Kathleen and Henry's garden was a large, grass-covered hole in the ground, which was hidden out of view of the house. You would have to walk down some winding stone steps to find the hole, as it was hidden behind a green, shrubby area. Every weekend, the children would run down to the bottom of the garden after a delicious early dinner, which Mum had just cooked for them, and try to spot any animals that would slowly and shyly crawl out. Kathleen and Henry would hide behind the mulberry bush and spy on rabbits, moles, foxes, and birds digging up worms or sniffing out the next delicious, juicy bug or blade of grass to chew and munch on. Each animal had a special name. Kathleen and Henry were very good at naming all the animals who crawled out the hole during the late time of day. They had great respect for these animals as they lived in quite interesting conditions, especially in winter time when it was cold and miserable. There was Detective Fox, Lady Badger, Sir Rabbit, Mrs. Mole, Mr. Hedgehog, and a few others whose names they mixed up occasionally as they all looked very similar. The few they named were very special, they felt, as they did interesting jumps, sniffed or rolled around on their backs, at times giving themselves a good old scratch. It's always important to use titles for these animals, as it is very respectful indeed. Sometimes, as the seasons went on, Kathleen and Henry would see the new babies of these animals slowly sniffing and crawling out the holes behind them, following their moms and dads to find food. During winter time, only the adult animals would crawl out in the cold. Henry and Kathleen wished that they could help them find food, but always knew it was best to let the animals just get on with what they needed to do on their own. Kathleen and Henry thought that if they interfered, then the animals might find them to be rude and tell them to mind their own business. One wonderful sunny spring day, Mum called Kathleen and Henry to come back to the house early. Mum shouted to the children at the bottom of the garden, "Kathleen and Henry, time to come back to the house, please. It will soon be your bedtime, and I would like you to see an invitation we have received from your Auntie Carrie and Granny Fay." "Coming!" Kathleen and Henry shouted. Of course, the garden was huge, and shouting was the best way to communicate if Mum was insistent on having the children arrive home as soon as possible. She would bellow as loudly as she could, which sometimes sounded a little too strict. Henry said to Kathleen, "Come on, let's go before it gets too dark, Kathleen, or we may get into big trouble." So off they ran up the stairs, trying not to slide on the muddy, just watered flower bed, as always, hopping to not get their feet too dirty. Well, it never quite worked out that way, as Mum and Dad always made them wash their feet in the bath before they hopped into bed at night. If you were down at the bottom of the garden, you were bound to get your feet dirty, especially with all the fresh animal droppings, which sometimes squished between your toes. "Hi, Mom, we're here," said Kathleen, panting to try to catch her breath. "Into bed, please, children, but first, go and brush your teeth and wash your feet in the bath with warm water," said Mom. "I just knew she would say that," said Henry, with a tired and grumpy look on his face. Once they finished doing what they needed to do, Mom sat them both down on their beds and spoke to them about the exciting invitation which the children had received from their great Auntie Carrie and Granny Fay. This is what it said. "Dear Kathleen and Henry, you are both invited to join Auntie Carrie and Granny Fay on their great expedition for high tea at all the top venues here in London. We are so happy to know that your mom has agreed for us to take you to all of these wonderful places over the next week. We shall start tomorrow, with our first stop being high tea at the Ritz." Well, there were no words to describe the delight and excitement on the children's faces. They jumped up and down on their beds, and Mum had to tell them to stop. "Now, lie down and go to sleep, you two. Tomorrow you'll need to wake up early to start your tour of all these wonderful places, where you'll indulge in tasty scones, cakes, and biscuits, and get to sample teas from all over the world." The children listened to Mum, knowing that if they misbehaved, then more than likely they would not be allowed to join Auntie Carrie and Granny Fay for this wonderful and exciting treat. As they closed their eyes, Mum tucked them into bed and switched off their bedroom light, leaving the door slightly ajar. "Good night, my two little angels. Sleep soundly," said Mum in her soft voice. And with that, they both quickly fell soundly asleep. The next morning, Kathleen and Henry woke up bright and early. Mum had laid out their clothes, which were ironed beautifully and laid out ready to be worn at the end of their beds. Kathleen had a sky blue dress with frills, tailored at the bottom, and white lace trimming around the neck, with a large white long silk sash to tie around her waist. The outfit was completed with white socks and white shoes, and a silver clip to wear in her hair. For Henry, Mom had laid out a button-up collar baby pink shirt, white slacks with gray shoes, and a black blazer. They both looked so smart once they were dressed in their best. After they had breakfast, there was a knock at the door. George, Granny Fay's driver, had come to pick up the children and take them on to Regent's Park to play for the morning, and then to meet Auntie Carrie and Granny Fay at the Ritz Hotel. George smiled and, in a very deep voice, said, "Hello, children. So lovely to see you after so very long. You need to hop into the car quickly, as it is getting a bit late, and I do not want your Auntie Carrie and Granny Fay waiting around for too long. I shall take you to Regent's Park to feed the swans first, and to play in the playground. But then we must get a wiggle on and arrive at the Ritz promptly." "Yippee!" said the children excitedly. Mom intervened. Now, children. George, please make sure the children behave themselves in the car. And children, remember to watch your manners, okay? Don't forget the birdseed." "Of course, Mum. Bye." Kathleen and Henry scrambled into the car with the dried birdseed in their hands, ready to feed the swans, who often chased them or tried to peck at them. Mum just sighed. "Oh dear, George, good luck. Don't let them get too close to those pesky swans, or I may have to write a letter to the Queen, stating that her royal birds have eaten the children." Ha ha ha! Mom thought she was hilarious. At least she amused herself. George laughed good-naturedly. As he turned away, he said, "Don't worry, madam. The children will have plenty of fun today." He seated himself in the driving seat and drove out of the gates, carefully with the children in the back seat. Once the children arrived at the park, Henry and Kathleen sprinkled the seed near to the large pond, where the swans slowly walked up to them. This time, Henry and Kathleen were much wiser and stood back as far as they could before the long-necked swans tried to peck at their little fingers. The birds flocked to them quickly. Doves, ducks, swans, and even a few squirrels came scuttling past, being the pesky little animals they were, foraging and running off in their fast-paced manner up the nearest tree trunks. Henry and Kathleen had a marvelous time at Regent's Park that morning. George made sure they looked after the clothes they were wearing and didn't make themselves all dirty before their lunch with Auntie Carrie and Granny Fay. "Let us go, children. Time for tea." Off they drove to the Ritz, so looking forward to all the delicious treats, and especially the iced cupcakes with silver sprinkles on them. There they were, Auntie Carrie and Granny Fay, waiting for them just outside the Ritz Hotel, looking beautifully dressed. Auntie Carrie wore a bright red dress with silver shoes and a black blazer. Granny Fay was wearing a bright green dress, which finished just below her knees, with a lovely embroidered green scarf and gray shoes. Granny Fay always looked her best, wearing her pearl earrings and beads around her neck. And so did Auntie Carrie, with all of her bright colors and beautiful smile. They were such elegant ladies. Auntie Carrie loved her bright colors, and, of course, always pulled them off with her fun and outgoing personality, while Granny Fay was always so graceful and smiley. They both greeted Henry and Kathleen with huge cuddles and welcomed them on their exciting tour around London to visit all the major hotels for high tea. "Come on, children, our table has been booked and we can't be late," said Auntie Carrie. So off they all toddled into the Ritz, where they were greeted by a waiter who sat them down to tea. The table was a square one, covered in a fine white dinner cloth, elegantly laid out with the finest of silverware. China teacups and saucers were placed on the table, engraved with beautiful designs around the rims. Sugar, honey, butter, and brown sugar cubes sat waiting for them to make their order before the delicious treats arrived for them to eat and enjoy. Auntie Carrie and Granny Fay decided to order straight away, as they had started to feel rather peckish. They ordered the most delicious treats for everyone, and the children could hardly wait. After a short delay, trays arrived bearing divine-looking scones with cream and strawberry jam, carrot cake, smoked salmon, and cucumber sandwiches, jelly treats, chocolate brownies, and so much more. Wow, what a day it was! The children placed their napkins on their laps, and with Auntie Carrie and Granny Fay's instructions, they managed to slowly start taking treats from the large, layered silver trays laden with all sorts of goodies. Despite their temptation to gobble up everything in one go, they used a fork and a spoon to eat their cakes, just as Auntie Carrie had taught them both. Kathleen and Henry managed to calm themselves at the table and eat more slowly by giving each other a good kick in the ankles to remind themselves of the need to slow down. "Ouch!" said Kathleen. "Shh!" said Henry mischievously. After eating a large number of cakes and cookies, Henry and Kathleen asked to please be excused from the table to go to the bathroom. "Of course," said Granny Fay. "Don't be long now." So off they walked down a long passageway looking for the bathroom. But they could not seem to find it and decided to take the lift instead to search for it. They were not sure where they were going. All they wanted to do was find a place to play and not sit with Auntie Carrie and Granny Fay, as they talked for ages and were taking so very long to finish. Granny and Auntie hadn't seen each other for so long and needed a lot of time to catch up on what they had been up to recently. As Kathleen and Henry got into the lift, they decided to press the button, which led them to the basement. The duo were being very naughty. They both knew what they were doing was wrong, and that this would not at all be allowed by Auntie Carrie and Granny Fay. They would be in so much trouble if they were caught. Still, they pressed the basement button anyway, hoping to snoop around and see what was down there. Suddenly, with a whoosh, and much faster than they ever expected, the lift began falling fast. Kathleen and Henry got a huge fright and clung hard to the railings and each other. They were not expecting this. Kathleen screamed, "Ah! What's happening to us? This lift is going too fast!" They both started to shiver with fright. Their eyes were as large as the saucers from which they'd just eaten, and their stomachs tossed and churned up the food they had eaten so much of. "Oh no!" cried Henry. "What's happening?" Then, with a massive clunk, the whole lift jolted to a stop. Both children were still holding on tight, not knowing what might happen next. There was a long silence. Slowly, they both pulled themselves up, trying to catch their breath and calm themselves down. They had no idea what had just happened, but thank goodness they were okay. The lift was silent. The only sound was of the two children breathing deeply. They were frightened, hoping they would not have to go through anything else so rough and scary. "Kathleen, are you okay?" said Henry, stroking her forehead. Yes, I think so, Henry. Are you?" "Yes, I think I may just be. I don't know what happened there, but that was so very scary. Thank goodness we are both all right." They both looked at each other with a huge amount of relief in their eyes. "Henry," said Kathleen, "can you hear something?" "No, what?" "What have you heard, Kathleen?" "I don't know what you're talking about. This has been frightening enough. Don't scare me any more, okay?" Suddenly, Henry heard the sound as well. His eyes grew bigger. They both fell silent as they tried to hush themselves. It was a sort of shuffling sound. Was something there? Where were they? They had dropped so low and so hard that their knees had given way as the lift jolted hard to a stop. A bright light started seeping through the crack of the lift door. It radiated brighter and brighter through the gap blinding Henry and Kathleen. Then, with a slow, long grinding creak, the door of the lift opened. The light shone brighter and brighter, and the lift doors opened wider and wider. A shadowy figure appeared. Henry and Kathleen pressed themselves as far back into the corner of the lift as possible, holding on to each other tightly, breathing heavily and afraid of what might happen next. The lift doors were now wide open, and the bright light had a beautiful strength to it. The most stunning golden yellow beams were streaming through into the lift. The shadowy figure walked forward. There he was, tiny eyes, a small body, and the furriest tail you had ever seen. Detective Fox! What? How? When? What's happening, Henry? That's Detective Fox from our garden. Oh my goodness! There he stood before the children, the most handsome of all foxes, with his brush-like furry orange tail, strong Detective Fox features, and looking as dashing as ever in his top hat, waistcoat, and bow tie. A detective's magnifying glass was hanging around his neck. Henry and Kathleen could not believe their eyes. "Hello, children," said Detective Fox in his husky voice. "Don't worry. We all know that you stare at us at the bottom of your garden. You think we can't see you, but of course we can. Ha ha ha. Now, listen here. You two, all of us animals knew you were coming here today to the Ritz for tea. Of course, we knew you were going to go exploring around the hotel as we've been watching you both. And we know exactly what you two are all about and how you work. So don't think you can hide anything from us, lot, as we are just too smart for you." The children looked at each other in amazement and laughed. "So come on then, move your little human feet and follow me. We're going on an expedition through the tunnels." "The tunnels?" they both said at the same time, in shock and not quite knowing how excited they should be. "Yes, the tunnels. And now you'll experience the true art of having high tea at all the best spots in London." The children were amazed, curious, and excited at the same time. Here they were with one of their favorite animals in the world, Detective Fox, who they greatly respected. What excitement they were both feeling, mixed with other strange emotions. They stepped out of the lift and into the bright light shining in their eyes. As their feet touched the ground outside the lift, it felt soft, like cushions. Detective Fox said in his deep Detective Fox voice, "Now, wear these, children. They will help with the glare. And don't take them off, okay?" Detective Fox handed the children a pair of goggles each and put on a pair himself. They put them on and carried on walking through the tunnels. They weaved in and out of the tunnels. It started to get confusing. Where on earth were they? And with each step they took, they felt a little bounce beneath their feet. They both kept looking down. Finally, realizing what this ground was, Kathleen said in excitement, "Henry, we're walking on marshmallows!" Henry looked down in amazement. They both started to laugh and laugh, jumping and giggling as they walked along. "Now, children, do not eat the floor or the walls, which are made of chocolate. If you eat the walls, then the tunnel may collapse and we'll have to call the emergency mole brigade to dig us out." "Okay, we will do our best," said Kathleen and Henry, feeling a little disappointed. Just as they said this, so Detective Fox and the children reached a door. The door was made of thick glass, which had a painting of a large dragonfly on it, and above the dragonfly were the words, "High tea at the Savory Hotel." The light shone through the glass even brighter than before, as Detective Fox pushed the door open. "Come on, children. You have now arrived at your first venue." Detective Fox pushed hard on the door. It opened very slowly, with a loud creaking sound which echoed throughout the tunnels. The children could not believe the most magnificent setting before them. A table laid out for them with cream donuts, strawberry crackers, delicious tarts, and treats of all kinds. Pots of assorted teas from all around the world. A table not just for Henry and Kathleen, but what seemed also to be set for others too. It stretched on and on, down the long narrow room. Above the table hung the most beautiful chandelier the children had ever seen. As they looked closer, they realized that the light coming from the chandelier was an accumulation of the brightest and tiniest fireflies they had ever seen, all seated neatly on top of one another, exuding a light so powerful that it lit up all the tunnels for as far as they could see. Now they knew where the blinding light was coming from. They looked upon the scene, and their jaws dropped open in silence. "Wow!" exclaimed Henry. "This is the most amazing sight I have ever seen," said Kathleen. Detective Fox ordered the children to walk through the door and to be on their best behavior, as this was no place to muck around and misbehave. "Yes, we certainly will be well behaved, Detective Fox," Henry said respectfully as Kathleen nodded in agreement. "Now go and find yourselves a lovely place to sit, okay? We will all be through to join you shortly." Henry and Kathleen both stared quizzically at each other. "All?" asked Kathleen. "Who is all?" "You will see," said Detective Fox in a happy voice. And with that, there they all were, streaming through the door. One by one were all the animals from the children's garden which they loved so very much. Detective Fox, Lady Badger, Sir Rabbit, Mrs. Mole, and Mr. Hedgehog. "Oh my goodness!" gasped Kathleen. Both children stared and shook their heads, not quite believing what their eyes were seeing. There was Lady Badger in a fine dress made of golden silk woven by the silkworms which Kathleen and Henry sometimes used to collect and keep in shoe boxes to see them weaving their cocoons on mulberry leaves collected from the garden. Her dress had a heavy golden silk collar. How beautiful she looked! Sir Rabbit wore a Scottish kilt, a very interesting tartan scarf around his neck, and his green beret. Mrs. Mole, on the other hand, was quite an interesting character, and wore a tiny pink tutu and leotard with pink ballet shoes. Oh, and Mr. Hedgehog just wore big, tie-up brown worker boots on his feet and a bottle green bow tie around his neck, dotted with tiny white spots. The bow tie was a little too large for him, if the truth is told. They all came strutting through the door, very happy to see the children. "Hello, Kathleen and Henry," they said all at once, giggling as they saw their human friends. Henry and Kathleen still could not believe what they were seeing. "Now, children, close your mouths," said Detective Fox. "We know you are quite surprised, but don't worry. We shall all now sit down and have tea." With that, they all sat down at the table and started to laugh and joke about how they always knew the children were spying on them in the garden, being so nosy and not minding their own business. As they were about to start eating, two bumblebees flew down and laid napkins on each of the diners' laps. Beautiful white woven silk napkins, which the silkworms had taken so much time and trouble to create. Silver spoons and forks were placed on either side of their plates, which had been borrowed from the hotel kitchen, which sat directly above their tunnel dining room. They all ate the delicious treats slowly, laughing and joking with each other and enjoying the moment. Mrs. Mole suddenly decided that it was time to dig another hole, so she got up and went to work, scuffling the walls with her hands. She was gone in an instant. Straight through the tunnel she went. Sir Rabbit decided to join her. "Please excuse me from the table," he said in a happy, bouncy voice, and a very bright firefly flew behind them, keeping a bright light for them to work by. Well, mainly for Sir Rabbit, of course. Mrs. Mole was so blind that the darkness did not bother her in the slightest. The others sat patiently, waiting for the pair to finish. Once done, Detective Fox said, "Come on then, children and family. We should follow Mrs. Mole and Sir Rabbit through the tunnels now. They will be there already." "Where is there, Detective Fox?" asked Henry in delight. "Our next venue, of course," replied Detective Fox, as though that should be obvious to the children. "Now, come on, and mind your heads. When you walk through the next tunnel, you'll see there are dewdrops everywhere, as it has been raining quite hard today." "Okay, sure thing," said Henry, through the excitement of getting going through the tunnel to see what would happen next. This time, still wearing their goggles, of course, the tunnels were quite sticky, and the marshmallow ground was sort of gooey, and it stuck to the bottom of their shoes, squelching and squishing as they went along, bending over slightly so as not to get their heads wet. They walked through the tunnel. All of a sudden, and out of nowhere, the tunnel dropped down a sheer face. Detective Fox had to ask the children and animals to stop immediately. The fireflies had been falling behind the animals, giving off their bright glow to help them walk on. But when Detective Fox brought everyone to a halt, the little insects decided to go first to see what was ahead. When they did, and their light shone the way ahead, everyone gasped in surprise. There before them lay a slide, a very long slide. It was the longest slide one could have ever dreamed of, whirling and twirling through a huge underground room. And the only way to get to the other side of the room would be to slide down the slide. Off they went, one by one. "Woo-hoo!" They all laughed and cheered as they each went whizzing down and around and about on the slide. Whee! How much fun they were all having! "Ha ha ha ha!" laughed Henry and Kathleen, and with a large cushion thump onto the marshmallow ground, ensuring they did not hurt themselves, they bounced into their next destination. Boing, boing, boing. Immediately they landed by another lavishly set table and bounced right into their chairs. It was the funniest moment they had in a long time, watching each other as they bounced and laughed in the most excitable voices, with bellowing giggles echoing throughout the tunnels. There they sat, smiling at one another, while in front of them was a big sign which read, "Welcome to the Dorchester." "Wow," said Henry to Kathleen in a low, husky whisper. He did not want to speak louder, for there lay before them two very large, fat, hairy caterpillars fast asleep. Each caterpillar had a big round orange head, but their bodies were green. As they stared at the caterpillars curled up in the corner, the fireflies fluttered their way into the dining area, and one by one they sat on top of each other to recreate the most magnificent light. This time they made their chandelier look like a shooting star. But this was no ordinary shooting star, for the star hung above the table, and the star's tail led through a passageway they had not been through before. It was as though the fireflies were getting ready for the children's next expedition, which of course they were. The bumblebees laid the tablecloths down with their silky legs and helped the children to place their napkins on their laps. With that, Detective Fox said to the children in a low voice, "Now, you two, whatever you do, do not wake up the caterpillars. They get very grumpy if they're woken up, and will not appreciate it if you do." "What will happen?" asked Kathleen. "Well," said Detective Fox, "you'll have to run and hide. I will not be able to help you fast enough. So eat up, enjoy this delicious high tea. But let us be merry quietly." So all the animals and the children silently ate and drank their delicious tea. They were on their best behavior, more than ever before. They learned the art of being quiet at the table that day and realized how wonderful it was to concentrate on eating, enjoying every mouthful of such a scrumptious selection of the finest chocolates, cakes, sandwiches, and teas from all over the world. How tasty the treats were! What good cooks the animals must have been to have prepared such a wonderful spread for them. Lady Badger was so pleasantly surprised by how well the children behaved that she gave them each an extra chocolate to enjoy. "Thank you so much," said Kathleen. Henry said, "We are both so grateful for you taking the time to bring us through the tunnels and show us where you live and how you dine each day." "Oh, we don't do this every day," said Mr. Hedgehog. "We're doing this for you as a special treat for showing us that humans are not all that clever after all." All the animals laughed. "Why would you say that?" asked Henry. "Well, Henry, because one day you'll realize that without us animals, there would be no journeys for humans into the great wilderness or the unknown, as it is mainly us you seek to find when you are out and about in the countryside." "I see," said Henry. "Well, perhaps you are right, Mr. Hedgehog." Sir Rabbit, Detective Fox, Lady Badger, and Mrs. Mole all agreed with Mr. Hedgehog. Indeed, they all sat together, munching on their treats, sipping on sparkling lemonade served in tall glasses. Just as they were having this conversation, one of the caterpillars opened its eyes slightly. Kathleen saw it and got a fright. She gasped, and everyone looked around. The big eye stared at them. It was bright green, speckled with tiny white dots, like fairy dust which had settled. The caterpillar started moving. All the animals and both the children froze in their chairs. Sir Rabbit said to Kathleen and Henry in a very quiet voice, "Right, you two, be extra quiet. We now have to tiptoe out of this room. I'm afraid we've woken the caterpillars." As Kathleen got up, she rudely scraped her chair on the ground with a very loud screech. Then, as both caterpillars eyes opened wider than wide. The animals and the children all looked at one another in absolute terror. Not knowing what was going to happen to them, they all started racing out of the dining room, following the tail of the shooting star the fireflies had created for them. They ran down the tunnel, all screaming and shouting, "Oh no, not the caterpillars!" With that, the caterpillars started shooting out their tiny hairs at the animals and children. "How dare you wake us up?" said one of them. "Leave us alone!" They kept on firing the tiny hairs out of their green bodies. The hairs flew down the tunnels where everyone was running. They had to hide from the tiny hairs, because if one struck you, you would start to itch and scratch like crazy. The animals and children thundered on down the tunnel, running as fast as they could. They didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Luckily, Detective Fox knew about a hidden door. He said to the children and the rest, "Hurry now, everyone. Turn right into the next tunnel. There's a door there where we can hide." And with that, they all scrambled through the door to safety. Phew! Panting loudly and with mist goggles from the heat of their bodies, they all managed to calm themselves down. The fireflies had flown in with them, so it was a bit of a tight squeeze. But at least there was plenty of light so that they could all see. They had to take off their goggles and wipe them dry again with their clothes. Not the proper thing to do, really, but this time they had no choice. After a while, and slowly but surely, the children opened the tunnel door with a creak. The fireflies peeked around the corner to make sure there was no one around. All clear to go, everyone tipped out of the tiny little storeroom and carried on their journey through the tunnels. All in a line they walked. Sir Rabbit decided that he was truly exhausted and said to them all, "We're going to have another sit down, everyone. Now get ready, because just around the corner is a rocket launcher which will take us from A to B." "A rocket launcher?" exclaimed Kathleen and Henry at the same time, quite frightened out of their wits. "Yes, certainly," said Lady Badger. "No, don't be afraid," said Detective Fox. "We'll be there in no time if we all hop on that." They all walked into a connecting tunnel. The room was quite large, and the rocket launcher was facing yet another tunnel. They stopped and stared at it, all bumping into one another as they came through the door to a grinding halt. Henry and Kathleen's eyes were huge with excitement. "Right, get on, will you?" said Mr. Hedgehog. Mrs. Mole sat in the front and held on tight. Everyone else scrambled on behind. Sir Rabbit pulled out a match, which was next to the rocket, waiting to be used. He lit the tail of the rocket, jumped on, and said, "Hold on, folks. Get ready for the ride of your life." Everyone held on for dear life, gritting their teeth as they waited for takeoff. As the fuse burnt down towards the rocket, they all started counting backwards. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, blast off! Ah! They went shooting through the hole ahead of them. Their heads flew back and their cheeks filled with air as the rocket launched itself through the tunnel, firing huge sparks behind and flying at lightning speed. It flew, whizzing through the tunnel, not touching the walls, as the tunnel had been perfectly created for the rocket to fly through. "Woohoo! No more caterpillars!" shouted Mr. Hedgehog, his spikes flying back as the wind caught them. Large echoes of excited cries of laughter filled the tunnel. Lady Badger had to duck her head as Sir Rabbit's ears were flapping everywhere, and so was his kilt. Detective Fox laughed and at the top of his voice shouted, "Faster! Faster! Faster!" On and on they flew down the super long tunnel that must have taken the animals ages to dig. Screaming and shouting broke out, and they came to a huge open space where the rocket landed with a jolt, skidding through the last part of the tunnel into the widest room they had been through so far. This room was full of dust, which all flew up into their faces. They were choking as the rocket came to a massive stop. Cough, 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 they all went. Thank goodness their goggles stopped them getting any dust in their eyes. Where were they? They looked around. Henry, Kathleen, and the animals dusted themselves off, sneezing and trying to make themselves orderly again by straightening their clothes back into place and dusting one another's shoulders. Over in one corner there was a bright light. The fireflies had flown there to brighten that area with their twinkly, shiny bottoms. Of course, the children were extremely curious and went to go and see what was there. Into the corner they peered, and there before them was the most beautiful waterfall which trickled slowly into a crystal clear pond. Goldfish swam in the pond, and lilies lay on the surface of the water, sprinkled with dewdrops from the mist of the waterfall. The light shone brightly on the dewdrops, creating a stunning rainbow of colors, which lit up what looked like a cave. But this cave was no ordinary cave. This was the Royal Horse Guards Hotel's cave, a hotel ever so popular for enjoying an afternoon tea. "Oh," said Kathleen in amazement. "This is so spectacular. I'm speechless. I have no words to describe the beauty of such an incredible place." Henry just shook his head. He too was speechless at the beauty of the tea house. The animals strolled in, laughing and joking at what had just happened on the rocket. They walked around the corner looking jolly, teasing each other that it was the others' fault that the crash landing they had just encountered was so bad, and blaming it all on Sir Rabbit, who lit the spark in the first place. "Don't you know that lighting those things takes a lot of care and attention to detail?" complained Lady Badger in her ever so posh Badger accent. "I am truly sorry," said Sir Rabbit. "Do you know, though, that I am a professional at these things? So you shouldn't doubt me too much on my lighting skills." "Oh, just be quiet, the both of you," said Detective Fox, laughing hard even while he was telling them off. With that, the animals all sat down again at the table. Henry and Kathleen were still so amazed that they forgot to sit down. They were staring at the beauty of the cave. "Sit down, you two little humans," said Detective Fox. So they did, slowly and with wide eyes, looking out at everything before them. Fluttering out of the cave were lots of butterflies with the largest, most beautiful wings they had ever seen, gold and silver, blue and pink. They brought with them trays of delicious treats attached to their tiny butterfly legs. The trays were made of silver, their feelers so long and their eyes as bright as the sun. They fluttered in and out of the cave, slowly placing all the delicious treats up and down the tabletop for the children and animals to enjoy. The fireflies rested behind the waterfall, setting bright shimmers of light around the cave, making the butterflies' wings shine like diamonds. Henry and Kathleen placed their napkins on their laps and sipped on their tea looking into and not over their cups. This was the best way to drink tea. Not only that, but they also used their silver spoons and forks, so nicely set out by the butterflies for them to eat with. All the animals complimented Kathleen and Henry on how good their table manners were. "Well done," said Mr. Hedgehog. "You are a true inspiration to all the other children out there. Who should follow you with such good manners when you are seated at the table?" "Quite right," said Mrs. Mole. Again they all ate quietly, enjoying and savoring every mouthful. The butterflies kept at their job, filling the teacups, which sat so elegantly on their saucers with milk, honey or sugar lumps, flitting in and out of the cave, and flying around to show the children and animals how beautiful they were. The group's time had come to an end at the Royal Horse Guards Hotel tea room. Detective Fox slowly got out of his chair and pushed it in, trying to do his best not to scrape his chair on the ground. All the other animals followed suit. Kathleen asked, "What are we doing?" They all laughed at her. Mrs. Mole said, "Don't you worry now, dear child. You are going to join us. We would never leave you alone, you know." Henry looked up and said, "Of course, Mrs. Mole, we know you would never do that. But I also would very much like to know what's happening. I haven't quite finished my tea." "Oh, don't worry, Henry," said Mr. Hedgehog. "We've been here for some time now, and it's time to go for our last lot of high tea. Okay, child?" he said in a stern voice. Just as Mr. Hedgehog was finishing speaking, Lady Badger started talking about some horses. "Right now we need 2 horses. Detective Fox, bring them with their reins on, but no saddles, as there are quite a few of us. Bring the horses, the gorgeous white ones with the lovely manes. We like those, please. Thank you." Lady Badger was so bossy sometimes, but everyone always listened to her, as it was very respectful to do so. "Horses?" said Kathleen and Henry at the same time. "Well, it should indeed be interesting to see what happens next," said Henry in a jokey, matter-of-fact voice. Detective Fox walked off right into the cave. You could hear loud echoing footsteps as he brought the horses out, and their hooves clomped about. "Well, I never," said Kathleen in a shocked tone. The horses were huge, and they didn't look like horses. She and Henry were expecting them to be a little smaller than that. They both laughed. "Well, how do you think we could ride little horses?" said Detective Fox, with a smile on his face, knowing how gorgeous the white horses looked. They all started laughing. They could not believe they were going to be riding through the tunnels on these horses. They were pure white. The hair around their ears looked as though it needed a good cut. But what beautiful deep blue eyes they had, shining like blue topaz stones. Kathleen whispered, "They have a unicorn horn in the middle of their foreheads." "Are you thinking what I am thinking?" The horses seemed to know what Kathleen was thinking, and they suddenly spoke. "Yes, humans, you are right. We are not horses, but we are related to them. We are the originals, the unicorns. We have to live out of the sight of humans now. Humans hunted us to extinction, but some of us survived and lived in the tunnels, only coming to the surface on special nights." Kathleen and Henry gasped again. "I am sorry, we didn't think you could speak." "Really? Why are you surprised? All the animals you meet down here can speak. Why should we be any different? Please remember that it is excellent manners to treat everyone as equals to yourselves. I think that is a good lesson, don't you? Henry stammered, yes, and we are sorry. Kathleen agreed. She was sorry as well and would think more carefully in the future. Okay, you are forgiven, but next time try to think before you speak and laugh at animals like us, said the unicorns. For that's what they really were, smiling at the children. We certainly shall, said Kathleen, still trying not to laugh at just how wonderful they were. Are you quite finished with this ranting, all of you? Goodness me, said Detective Fox. Now, let's get a wiggle on and move out of this cave. The animals started making their way onto the unicorns. Henry on one with Detective Fox in front and Mr. Hedgehog behind. Kathleen on the other with Mrs. Mole and Lady Badger. They squeezed and shuffled, trying to fit. Oh, come on, said the unicorns. You're taking too long. We need to start on our journey. Finally, they all felt settled on the unicorns' backs. It was not very comfortable at all. Gosh, what a lot of fun this is going to be, thought Mrs. Mole. As they stood at the exit to the tunnel, they all waved the butterflies goodbye. The fireflies flew ahead of them, leading the way through the tunnel with their bright lights. All of them tightened their goggles for the journey into the unknown. Onwards we go, shouted Detective Fox, his voice echoing through the tunnels. The fireflies flew just above and ahead of them, keeping the tunnel well lit. As the fireflies began to fly, the unicorns started to make a wonderful neighing sound. The unicorns looked at each other, knowing what needed to be done next. And then out from the sides of their bodies grew the most beautiful white wings, sparkling with silver and white. Their hooves rose from the ground, and they tucked them under their bellies. Once again, Henry and Kathleen could not believe their eyes. What was happening? They held on tightly to the unicorns' horns. Then, like a bolt of lightning, both unicorns shot through the tunnels at full speed, wings flying backwards like a hawk in the sky. The force of the wind blew everyone's hair around their faces. The children's and animals' lips and cheeks wobbled as they sped so quickly through the tunnel, weaving in and out, in and out. What magical unicorns these were, and so quick! Everyone laughed with joy as they sped through the tunnels on these two magical creatures. Whee! They shouted, laughing as they sped forwards. How much fun they were having, all being together and enjoying one another's company. The fireflies worked very hard to keep ahead of the unicorns. Turning and soaring through the tunnels they went, loving every moment. I hope you're enjoying the ride, said the unicorns. You'll never forget such fun. We are sure of it. You are so right, answered Kathleen in delight. So right, agreed Henry. Ha ha ha. The unicorn's wings flapped, twisting and turning everybody upside down as they flew along. Woo-hoo! Everyone shouted. Woo-hoo! Suddenly, they reached a bright light. But this time, the light was not from the fireflies. This light was very special, a light that shone so brightly that not even their goggles could withstand the glare. They all closed their eyes tightly and raised their hands to shield their faces. The fireflies hid behind the unicorns to dim the light a little. As they peered through their fingers, there it was, a star! A star so bright it gleamed a beautiful golden color throughout the tunnel. A star so bright it shone with such intensity that it was blinding. Then, with a sudden flash, it was gone. Kathleen and Henry looked at each other, not knowing what had gone on. The children were shocked and amazed at the same time, wondering how something so beautiful had just come and disappeared in such a short space of time. "What just happened?" said Henry and Kathleen to the others. "That, my dear children, is the star of the universe," said Lady Badger in a soft voice. "A light so bright it is guiding you to the right place, telling you that you are in the right tunnel." Detective Fox sighed and looked at Lady Badger in exasperation. "We know why it happens, as well you know." He turned to Kathleen and Henry. "It happens because that is a very special door to a very special place to go and have tea. The door is shaped like a star, so when the door is open, the light shines through. Someone must have closed the door to make the star disappear. Now, let's go and find that door." They all jumped off the unicorns and started to feel for the star-shaped door. The fireflies tried to brighten the tunnel walls to look for the opening. "Come on, everyone," said Mrs. Mole. "I think I've found it." She had found a slight crack in the tunnel wall. They all felt around for the crack. Finally, they found it and pulled it with their fingertips. Creak went the door. The light shone brighter and brighter. "Come on, pull!" shouted Mr. Hedgehog. "We can do this if we pull together. 1, 2, 3, pull!" As they tugged on the door with all their might, the brightest of lights began to shine through again, blinding them once more. They looked at one another as they pulled as hard as they could. "Oh, we can do it," said Detective Fox. Then the door finally opened. The star-shaped door with light shining through stunned them all. But they could not help but try to look harder and harder beyond the glare. As they looked, their eyes started to see what stood before them. There, Henry and Kathleen stood. Hand in hand, with great delight, they began to smile. Before them lay the most beautiful long table made of pure gold. "Oh my!" exclaimed Kathleen. The animals were no less stunned and could not stop staring. Detective Fox found it difficult to be amazed by anything, but this time it was different. There they stood, not knowing what to say. The unicorns looked at them and said, "We hope you enjoy high tea at Claridge's. It's always very special here." The golden table and its chairs were encrusted with diamonds. The fireflies flitted to the chandelier above the table, bringing even more light into the room, making it shine so brightly that the table glowed. The walls and floor were made of pure crystal and marble, which shone a magnificent soft light around the table. Sparkling white doves flew over the golden table, bringing treats in their beaks to the children's plates. 2 mighty eagles sat at each end of the table on the backs of the chairs, watching for good table manners. They waited to dine, slowly being seated by a wonderful waiter, a tall man with dark hair and a very skinny body indeed. He wore a dicky bow tie and suit. His nose was a little red and pointed up. Kathleen and Henry indulged in some of the finest delicacies one could ever wish for. Cakes and teas from all over the world. Their napkins were on their laps, They made sure to use the correct cutlery and held each utensil perfectly. Their backs were straight, and they sat up with great respect. They knew it was best to keep their mouths shut when eating. Of course, nobody wanted to see them eating their food like a cement mixer. Yuck! What good manners they had! All the animals smiled at them. Kathleen and Henry started to look at the animals. Why were they starting to look hazy? Kathleen and Henry started to feel sleepy. Was it something in the cake that was making them tired? Something like a little bit of magic? Perhaps so. Then they were staring at Granny Fay and Auntie Carrie again. "You two, you're always daydreaming. Snap out of it," said Auntie Carrie, being bossy to her nephew and niece. Henry and Kathleen looked up, and then they looked at each other and smiled. "We can't wait to get home, Granny Fay and Auntie Carrie," said Henry. "Would you mind taking us home now so we can tell Mom and Dad all about our amazing day with you?" "Of course," the women both said to the children, delighted that the children took such a great interest in showing gratitude for their outing. When they got home, Kathleen and Henry said hello to their mom and dad very excitedly and, of course, told them how wonderful their day out with Granny Fay and Auntie Carrie had been. They scrambled through the back doors and ran down to the bottom of their garden as fast as they could, down the winding stairs to see the animals as they came out of their hole, feeding on succulent green blades of grass and juicy bugs. It was that special time of the day again. This time, Kathleen and Henry did not hide behind the bush to spy on them, but looked down the hole to see where the animals were. They could not see them. Where could they be? Then, much to their surprise, out from behind the bush, where Kathleen and Henry usually hid, the animals jumped out and gave them such a fright. Boo! Kathleen and Henry were so excited to see their new friends. "Ha ha! This time you caught us first," laughed the children. All the insects and bugs in the tunnels started to dance and crazily buzz around their heads, full of happiness and joy. They all laughed, joked, and talked about their great adventure through the tunnels. They danced, skipping and linking their arms in a circle around the mulberry bush. The silkworms sat in the trees above, weaving napkins out of silk. How wonderful it was to have enjoyed such a fun exploration through the tunnels below their garden, and sample some of the best places to go for tea in London. Kathleen and Henry ran back to their house and told Mom and Dad all about the animals. Mom and Dad smiled with delight and were so pleased that they had found so many wonderful friends. This had to be one of the very best adventures of their lives. The end. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe. In the description below, I've included links where you may find and purchase this book. Stay tuned. Next week, I will be reading Little London Pirates, Book 3,